Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Vic Matus is the weekend editor of the Washington Free Beacon. He is the co-host of the Getting Hammered podcast and my weekly guest who will be traveling to the afternoons with me, no longer having to get up at 6:30 in the morning and looking so bright and happy this morning. Vic, I have a big question for you. You're a newsman.
Yes.
When we have a disaster in California, how much does it register? You know, I've lived off and on here since 1978. I'm a Beltway guy now, but I'm out here to teach for 3 months. I am curious, what's your reaction to this catastrophe? There's nothing really other word that serves.
Yeah, that's right, Hugh. A good friend of mine who used to live out in California, he used to say that it would drive him nuts when the news was dominated by hurricane news. You know, a big hurricane's coming up, to Florida or wherever on the East Coast. And it's like, okay, it's just 24/7 coverage. We get it already. But they're out on the West Coast and, it doesn't resonate as much. I mean, it's terrible, but, how does it affect them? And we would say to them in response, well, we're seeing, California wildfires. That's always a story on your end. And it doesn't really affect us until it kind of does. And I think a lot of it has to do with the visuals, the optics, because there are fires, and they've been documented, obviously for a very long time, and dominating news. But I don't think I've ever seen anything like this, particularly the way these kind of, I guess you would call them chaparral fires. They've expanded very. I mean, they're not forest fires anymore. They've expanded into communities, and they turn into structural fires, which are stories in themselves. And whole communities. I mean, it looks like a scene from that '90s movie Volcano with Tommy Lee Jones, but it's real. You're surrounded by an apocalypse. It's unspeakable. So, it's on everybody's minds from coast to coast. I can assure you.
I look at you have a great picture there. People watching on the Salem News Channel can see that Vic's got a great studio from which to talk, and you've got a bookshelf behind you. Every one of those books represents a choice, and everything in everybody's house represents a choice, and it has significance. To lose thousands of homes of that sort and scale, as well as businesses and the people who work in those homes. And I was trying to explain this to Martha McCollum yesterday. Second order thinking, every one of those homes has workmen, craftsmen, people who cut the lawns, people who clean them. Every one of those businesses have worker shifts, 3 shifts sometimes. I think it's a loss of tens of thousands of jobs and an extraordinary amount. But does it make the news beyond one day of visuals?
It's making the news since it started. I can assure you that. I mean, we're going on how many days over here, and it's the first thing. It's the number one story. It's not Jimmy Carter lying in state. I can assure you that.
Well, that was I was going there next. Now we are blessed with particularly incompetent political class in California, and I say we because I'm here for 3 months to teach. I left this political class because it is so incompetent. What do you think of the response of Governor Newsom, the absence of Mayor Bass, the fecklessness with which people comment or don't comment on this catastrophe?
Right. So, the first thing that people want to say is, let's not, point fingers, and play the blame game. Okay, fine. Let's just focus on getting putting out these horrific fires. But at the same time, you can't help but ask questions. Okay, well, where's the water? How come they're not in the hydrants anymore? How come there's not any more water in the reservoir, for example? Do you do things like controlled fires versus fire suppression? And the answer is bad across the board for Democrats because they control California. And you know this, our listeners know this, the mayor, Karen Bass, the governor, Gavin Newsom. Mayor Bass being in Ghana while this happened. I mean, obviously she flew back, but it reminded me a lot of Mayor Marion Barry, and I think it was 1987 when he was in California at the Super Bowl when, Washington got dumped with 26 inches of snow, and they asked him, aren't you concerned? And he said, I called during halftime. I mean, but of course now, there's whole other element to how the money is spent in California. How much of it is to prevent fires like this, especially when you have meteorologists and everyone warning the state for a very long time that this sort of thing could happen. And you're finding out that they the fire department, the firefighters, they have all these sort of DEI initiatives, for example, or that one of the high-ranking people in Karen Bass's administration for Public Works is getting paid something like $750,000 a year, more than twice as much as her predecessor. Something's wrong, and there needs to be accountability.
It's actually a failed state. I don't know how to communicate to people, and I'm reluctant in the middle of others' loss and grieving to score political points, but there's a non-political governing point here. This is a failed state. It's been failed for 25 years. I worked and lived out here full time for 25 years, and it's been failed for a long time. I don't know that it can change those structurally, Vic, because it's an embedded political class that simply does not care, and there aren't enough victims. And that's the blunt reality, although there are a lot. I mean, there are thousands of people without homes, tens of thousands of people if you include their family members and their friends and their children. Lots of schools burned down. The Palisades High School was burned in part. The Getty did not burn down, the Getty Villa, thank goodness. But a lot has been lost, but not enough when you consider the density of blue voters. I just don't know that it will ever change. Do you think it will ever change?
Well, I mean, if you think about this sort of shift writ large during the 2024 election, there are a lot of places where we thought they were lost causes for conservatives versus liberals. Like, look around, haven't you had enough? And, don't you want that pendulum to swing back to normalcy? And that's happened in certain places. I mean, there are places in the state of Florida, that we thought would never, shift from voting from liberals to conservatives. And certainly in city centers and among minorities, black men, Hispanics, they've come to the realization that, certain people have been in power for a very long time. And wait a minute, it dawns on them. I know what you're saying about, Donald Trump or about some Republican candidate, but I'm going to give that a try because there has to be better. This is a wake-up call, I think, certainly for a lot of Californians, that if they think they can do better than the current leadership, then they need to realize that. And but as you mentioned, there are a lot of people who would feel that way, Hugh, and they left. They left the state.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's a lot of us just gave up. My friend Carl, who ran a house painting business for 30 years in Fallbrook, he'd moved to Texas. A guy just called in who got burned out in the Paradise Fire 7 years ago. He moved to Texas. People that can leave, people who cannot leave are stuck with the bill. And now the insurance companies are just going to simply walk away from California. It's actually going to become too risky to live here, Vic.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, there are a lot of changes that have to be made. I don't know what the solution is. I mean, there are plenty of things that, if you live in California, that can be done for your house, for example, trying to make it more fire safe, the vents that come in so the embers don't come in and set it on fire from the inside and things like that. But you're dealing with, a colleague of mine who's a native Californian. He was telling me when he was growing up in Encino, the fire department would come around regularly to just clear out the brush because there's just so much brush and small trees which cause those kind of fires. And then they just stopped coming. And the brush is now out of control. And then you have a fire like this that I believe may or may not have started because of some fireworks, gone bad. They thought they put it out, but they didn't. And the next thing you know, you have this massive, massive disaster on the West Coast. And it's, it just can't happen again. I mean, they have to do something. And, when you have a lot of people, thank goodness, on social media exposing some of the insane multi-million or billion-dollar sort of initiatives for California and what they're spending time on and this fixation on DEI versus actual fire safety, that has to stop.
No, it's a completely shattered political culture. And I hope people, if the only good thing that comes out of this, and there isn't going to be any good thing that comes out of it, is just to focus on the absolute insanity of the California governing class, it will be a good thing. A quick exit question, Vic, because I've got to do a little selling here. When you are doing Getting Hammered, is the Free Beacon doing a podcast as well?
The Free Beacon used to do a podcast. It was a legendary podcast called Write and Writer. But, it was it's sort of a different time, a different place with a great cast of characters. People always say to bring it back, and I always say it was lightning in a bottle. I'd like to see the Beacon come back with its own new podcast again for a new era, a new time. So stay tuned. Hopefully, one of these days.
Yeah, because I do believe I asked the former and future president on Monday if legacy media was bleeding out. He thought that was too tough of a term, but he said, yeah, they got to fire everyone and start over. I actually don't think that's the key. The key is just people are going to leave and go to the Free Beacon, go to Getting Hammered. I wonder if you sense that. Is it fundamentally shifting so that the Wall Street Journal will survive? I'm not sure anything else does.
No, I think that's right. And we've been very encouraged from the amount of sort of the readership and the attention that people are paying to places such as the Free Beacon, where we're breaking stories and making news. I mean, it started obviously way before the 2024 election, but in that election itself, we started to ask questions that the mainstream wasn't asking, such as, did Kamala Harris really work at McDonald's? Let's take a look at that. Or did Tim Walz was he really in Hong Kong during Tiananmen? Let's really look at that. And we'll continue to sort of, ask the questions and break the news that the other side just doesn't want to do. And again, the big one was the fact checkers. We were told, by Meta fact checkers that Joe Biden did not have a problem reading that teleprompter. Everything that he said was intentional when he said, to, repeat or whatever it was, and he's reading clearly the line, and he said, no, they meant it. He meant it. And how do the fact checkers know that? Because the White House told us so.
White House told him, prosper and grow, Vic Matus. Follow him on X at Victorina Matus, and go and subscribe and